Hi, my name is Sangita Kumar, and I'm the CEO and founder of Be the Change Consulting. Join me in Liberated AF, the workplace revolution. This is a podcast where we get to explore what does it take to become the organization that we want to work for. So what is that? The organization I want to work for, it supports my humanity and makes me feel like I belong. It's a place that isn't racist, it isn't extractive. It works for the boomers and the Gen Alphas. There's space for everyone to bring their genius to work. Don't we want to become that? And don't we want to create that? So I have been studying organizational dynamics for over 20 years, and I love working with teams stuck in an entrenched challenge to bring clarity to diverse perspectives and look for ways that human-centered systems. We're going to tell stories, we're going to answer questions, we're going to offer strategies on this podcast. Together, we are going to become something new. Let's go.
Good day, Sangita. How are you?
I'm doing good. Well, yeah, I'm doing good.
You're doing good. That's so great to hear. My friend, I have been working on reflecting on the different dominant culture practices, and I was ear hustling because I heard you were talking about one in particular that we know oh so well is sense of urgency. So before we jump into it, I just want to hear from you, what is your relationship to sense of urgency?
I have no sense of urgency. I'm like always calm and grounded. I wake up in the morning, like not thinking, I'm not in my head. I like meditate for a couple hours. It gets me even more still. And then, like, I don't drink any caffeine. I'm like present. The energy I have when I wake up in the morning is the same energy at the end of the day.
Wow, then we're done. Thank you, you all. You can find the show
No.
notes. Okay, say more. What do you mean not?
Yeah, I mean, I will say as an organizational leader and a founder, like it's something that I've worked on for years to like have a balance, like to think about my to not be thinking about work all the time and like how to
Mm.
make things better or like how to take something that wasn't quite right and not like noodle on it and noodle on it and noodle on it in my head. And the amount of time I spend thinking about the work that I do, the clients that we work with, the challenges that we face, it it creates an urgency that is like I want to go from like idea into action. And what that does is like the people around me are rarely spending as much mental energy on those same things as I am. And so it's really hard for me to sync up with people to
Mm.
figure out how to do any kind of like, let's name the problem, let's discuss our solutions, let's ideate what the new possibilities can be, because I've like done so much in my mind. I'm often ahead of the group and then I'm just like in sprint mode, and it doesn't serve.
I hear you. And at the same time, a part of me, when you say I spent a lot of time, the amount of time I spent in my head thinking about work, that thus then create the sense of urgency. I feel like those are like the qualities of a good leader. That's the qualities of a good business owner, right? You want to stay ahead of the group. So what's wrong if you want to stay in your head and that you're thinking ahead of time and then you can share it with your team so it goes into action? Because in reality, if folks are, if they don't have um skin in the game in a company or organization, they're not going to spend as much time. It should be your job, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, that's really great. Yeah, I think you're right that like I think it's possible for that it's true for a lot of different roles, but leaders in particular, and
Mm.
then founders, even more so. It is our job to sort of be ideating and to kind of anticipate like what's coming up on the chessboard before other people, right? Like leading is not the same as reacting. So
Mm.
you can't get to strategy if you're not doing some advanced thinking. So that part is the good part. But the challenge, like what this term sense of urgency means, is like if I spend time imagining or like defining and visualizing for myself what's on this chessboard, what the challenge, what the threats are, how are we going to block and pivot, what do we do instead,
when I have to share that implementation with other people. So if it's a thing that I have to just implement by myself, there's no problem there, right? Like it's there's no one to say what's sense of urgency or not. It's I have a motivation to do something. If I know how to do it, I know what to do, and I am the person who needs to do it. I can just do it, and I could do it slowly. I could do it quickly. No one will call that sense of urgency. The
Right,
term
right.
sense of urgency, which is one of the most like commonly identified characteristics in organizations, when people are like, what impacts your sense of belonging in this organization?
Mm.
The sense of urgency to to be prepared to do something, to respond before having a chance to have thought about it, to implement something that I haven't like embodied or gotten on board with, or had my own chance to like grapple with what do I think the obstacles are, and where do I think what makes this juice worth the squeeze, right? Employees who feel that directives are given to them and then they need to act before their minds and bodies have had a chance to get ready to act, that
Mm.
doesn't feel good. It feels jarring, it feels stressful, it increases people's sense of like, what if I fail? This matters a lot to someone else. Someone else can really see the vision, and often my boss is the person who can really see where I'm supposed to go and I can't see it yet, but I'm being asked to deliver. Like that's what creates sense of urgency. And so leaders kind of doing that anticipatory thinking, that's not the problem. The problem is not recognizing the process that we are also going through to get to our clarity, and then giving the people who need to implement alongside of us the opportunity to go through that same journey. If I don't catch that there's like they need that time and space too, and that it's actually my job to lead them through a process,
Right, right.
um, then we can move with expediency, but we can scaffold the process and facilitate people's readiness to take action rather than kind of like smashing it onto them.
Right, because by doing that, I like what you said at the very beginning when you're saying that when the sense of urgency impacts the sense of belonging. And the way that people belong is to participate, right? You're like, I have this idea. I've been noodling and marinating on it. And that person also wants to sit and marinate in it and be like, I can do it. I have this
Yeah.
idea. Of course I can do those four things that you're saying. I'm really good at those things. So yeah, people wanna feel brilliant, and how they feel brilliant is how they're being asked to come into that. Now,
Yeah.
that totally makes sense, and so, we work with a lot of clients that are in system that moves fast, when we think about government agencies, we think about educational institutions, when I think about a principal who's constantly getting directives from their superintendent, the districts, and they're going down to their teachers, or, I can think of a lot of different roles like that. Where does a person begin? Like you started giving an example of like what you're thinking of and what you need to do before you're bringing it to a team. Will you be able to
Mhm.
offer us one or two examples of how we can leaders can be more methodical in a way that also brings them ease? Because I do think as a leader, sense of urgency sometimes, those words gets weaponized too, because you go fast, and if you're a person who actually works fast, someone goes, "Oh, you have a lot of sense of urgency," so they're like, "Whoa."
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So that's great. So I think the first thing is to split. Sense of urgency doesn't mean like you can't have a deadline and then hold people accountable.
Mm.
Things have to get done at
Yes.
within our constraints. And my experience is people understand that, employees understand that, teams understand that, but it needs to be kind of said like in a loving way that um, you might be asked to do something at a faster pace than feels comfortable to you, right? You that
Mm.
isn't that doesn't mean if I'm asking you to do something, if there is a need to do something and it is a legitimate need to get something done by a certain time and you want to take longer, but we don't have that extra time, you don't get to say like now this organization is functioning from a sense of urgency, right? That's
Yeah.
about personal preference. So this idea of sense of urgency, let's think of one. I think a lot about organizations that are looking to create like maybe one or two internal culture building projects or a
Mm,
staff development project alongside their business as usual. Right. So you're like at Be the Change, we have our client work, we have trainings that we offer, we have consulting work that we have to do. And then alongside of that, we also wanted to invest in our own professional development, our performance management systems. And so I was watching how people were working and I was like, oh, we need to establish kind of competencies that a supervisor, I mean, a facilitator would have, competencies for a consultant, competencies for a project manager, because I was seeing that without that language to define our work, we were having a hard time communicating and collaborating about what our expectations were.
okay.
Okay, so I think this happens a lot. People are like, "Oh, let's roll out some standards." And what I did from a sense of urgency is I was like, let me write a few down. I'm watching, people's actions. I'm noticing patterns in what coaching I'm offering the same, different people are getting coaching on the same things. I made like a list of a couple of competencies and I was like, okay, let's send them all out. And maybe there was like 5 per role, which adds up to 15, but many people are in many of those roles. 15 competencies all at once, like what will people really absorb or do with all like looking at all of these competencies? And so my instinct was like, let's just write it down and send it out so that people, and then my thought is once you have it, you read it and you figure out what to do with it and you close those gaps and now we're off to the races.
Mm.
But that's not how behavior change happens,
Right.
right? Not at all. So what will happen? Let's say I do that approach. Does that approach make sense? And you might have experienced me doing that.
I have experienced some level of that. Yes.
Okay, so then let's just kind of workshop through that. If you
Mm,
received a list of 15 competencies from
yeah.
your like leadership team,
Mhm.
and said, these are the competencies we're holding people accountable to. We don't expect you to, embody them all overnight, but I want you to be aware of them. What do you think your reaction would be to receiving an email like that?
I know I would probably look through it to see if I met the competencies, and then I would probably freak out if there are things that I'm like, I don't know how to do this. And then I would just be in a spiral of being really nervous. And I definitely would not be in a place where I'm like, this is wonderful. Thank you for starting all this great work off. So then I have this spaciousness to add to it. I would be stressed.
Great. Okay, so this thing, right? This document that I think is going to motivate behavior change, inspire people to see the kind of employee that we want folks to
Mhm.
be. It's doing something very different, right? It's making you feel smaller. It's diminishing your sense of self confidence. It's making you assess yourself without clear feedback. You would probably be asking if she's sending this out, um, who is not doing these things? Is it me? Is it someone else? It's going to create a comparative culture. It's not going to provoke those behaviors that we are hoping for. So, what could we do instead? I think what I have learned is when I start to think, oh, maybe we need to define our competencies, I could come to the team and say, hey, y'all, when we are thinking about these different roles, what do you think you're holding as standards for yourself? So I could facilitate a conversation and try to name standards for the group. Now that
Mm,
might be stressful too, because it could do the same thing, right? Talking about
right.
standards might make someone be like, well, what do I want to say? This standard that I know I can do? Do I want to say a standard that I know I don't have? Or someone else is saying a standard I never, that's not how I'm doing the job, which we know is why we're trying to create the standards. We're not all doing it the same way, and we're trying to create some alignment.
Mhm.
So the fact that it creates like an emotional, like a little bit of an emotional churn in an individual, like I don't think there's a problem with that. I think we can expect people to have some feelings. Sometimes you're feeling inspired, sometimes you're feeling nervous, sometimes you're feeling triggered, sometimes you're feeling excited, like, oh, I'm not doing that now. I want to learn how to do that. Or I could see how if I was doing it that way, it might actually get easier for me. I might be able to get these tasks done with less time. Um, so I still expect some emotional like
Yeah.
reactions. in all different directions. But I think it's okay because we know these feelings are part of performance management. And so we're seeding them early on in a very low stakes task. And then I notice, right? So as a facilitator, I'm holding space for all those different feelings. So I might say, yeah, while you're coming up with standards, write down anything that you're thinking about on a half sheet of paper and let's notice what comes up. And then let's take a look at what's on the table. And then let's also step back and notice what feelings are coming up for us. So I can invite it in like that. I don't have to make it about that. It doesn't have to all be about our feelings. I can acknowledge it and then say, okay, we will have some feelings as we go through this process. I'm going to now take these. I want you all to just start thinking about it. Look at the ideas we've co-constructed. Let's type these up. Let's put it on our walls. Let me send them out to you as an email. Just take a look at them once a week over the next 3 weeks until we meet again for this same meeting. And just notice like how might reviewing even brainstormed competencies from our colleagues shift the way you work. Right. And so now we've co-constructed them. We have a process of people kind of reviewing and reflecting on them. Will they review and reflect on them? Maybe, maybe not, but I've offered it. And then over time, then we can take the competencies. We could have another conversation. We can say, let's pick 1 or 2 that we want to focus on and let's test them. We can test together. We could imagine, let's take one and let's brainstorm what would it look like to practice this. So before creating like an official list and saying now this is our standards and we're going to be held accountable to these and you're going to see them in your performance review, all of that is more in the direction of creating policy, but it doesn't bring in like the relational element of change management. And it doesn't invest people in like the motivation towards their own growth. And so we can change the approach. Instead of going straight into policy, we can start with more of a piloting process. And just with little drops, we will actually start to see changes in behavior, which is what I want. I didn't actually start this process by saying, I want documented policies. I started by saying I wanted alignment across our team members in how they're holding their roles.
I like that you acknowledge that you would go through all this and some people might still have feelings because, you have the right to your feelings. What I like about this process is it creates that space where sense of urgency can disrupt people's ability to participate because of the sense of belonging, and that you can create a process where people are like, this is where you can share what you think. And for those folks who have been in different types of company where this doesn't exist at all, it's going to take a little bit of time. And I imagine that as you build your muscle towards this co-creation, and in some spaces, I feel like it's also, I was thinking of consent when you were saying this too, right? When people are saying yes to participating. I think as a leader, what I was listening to you and I was thinking, you as a leader or for me as a leader, I still could have created that entire list of competencies, but I don't have to show it to anyone. And so in this process, when I open it up to the team and hear from folks and also see how folks are feeling, I now have even more information to bring back to understand, okay, is my list like 80% go in the right direction, or I'm missing some things? And so that particular process where I just add 1 or 2 more co-created step, it actually helps me out in the long term, because if I didn't do those 2 steps, the resistance will probably take so much longer.
100%. Yeah, exactly. And I really liked this idea that you can, you could do it in many ways, right? You can pre-think your list and then without attachment to what's in your head, you can ask an open-ended question to your team. So let's solicit their feedback. You can offer 2 or 3 of your pre-thought ideas as a starting point. Like, these are the ones that I'm thinking of. And that helps to kind of bound, right? It gives an example. And so for people who are thinking about competencies for the first time, they have some sense of like, what are you expecting to see? You can also say, we're going to do this process. We have we'll take 15 minutes we'll carve out 15 minutes in a standing meeting. And then I want to invite 1 or 2 people to engage in this process with me over time. Like, it doesn't have to come back to the whole group. It can start with the whole group and then it can move into like a subcommittee. You can also just really say, let's pick one. Let's pick one competency that, from that 15-minute process, right? You brainstorm a bunch of things, you can pick one and say, let's all just try practicing this over the next month and see what it takes. And then when we come back together, let's check in on like, what were we able to do and where do we want more feedback, or what support do we need to get better at it? Because the process that we're actually thinking about is performance change. And so the more I can seed a co-constructive behavior in the team, the more likely whenever the competencies get defined, we will already know what it looks like to take a defined competency and practice embodying it. One more thought that came up for me when you were talking is, I think what this does, right? So why is this connected to sense of urgency? Sometimes people say, we've been working on this for 3 years, or you'll hear staff who will say, we've been talking about, becoming a more liberated culture for a long time, but nothing is changing. And so the more we can say, no, the change happens, the fact that we're talking about it together, we are changing today, right? And then it can take 3 years because we're not like, oh, we have to decide and then we have to act. Like, that creates sense of urgency. We get to say, over the next 3 to 5 years, we are going to evolve our approach to performance management. And it's going to start here. And we don't even know where it's going to end because we're going to go on this journey together. And so we'll figure out the next step once we try, based on what we learned from the prior step. And so it creates a more like organic methodology. And that's the thing, when you're like, a lot of people won't be used to this. We have to break up with the idea of like, it landed on your to-do list and you want it to be crossed off your to-do list. And so you jam a plan in place and then you send it out to be implemented.
Then I would love to um pose this question to the listener so you all can share what you think. And for Sangita, as we close out this episode, what what's one or two competency you think a leader should hold as they're holding self-awareness, doing this work to deconstruct their relationship to sense of urgency? I want you to answer, and then I would love to have folks share what they think too.
I think we could almost think of it as a scientific formula. If I think about the action that needs to happen, and I think how many people will be involved in the implementation of this action. If it's one, like just me, I can go as fast as I want to go.
Hmm.
If it's 3 people, I have to think it's going to go like at least at 1.5, like I have to go at least 1.5 times the pace that I could go by myself. As the number of people grows, the amount of time that it takes to implement, um, I think you should factor in that much more time in the ideation and planning stage instead, and then I think your implementation will go faster. So that's like, I don't know if that's exactly like a scientific formula, but there's something there mathematically. I also think you can think the number of people involved, can you get at least 20% of that number involved in co-planning, co-designing, co-thinking with you? So there's 5 people who will be responsible for something. Can at least 2 of those people be part of like ongoing input and feedback rounds, so that we're never designing alone and we're not setting the pace based on ourselves.
Yeah, then I would say that would be a competency, right? Is the ability to hold co-design,
Yeah. The ability to authentically integrate input and feedback from colleagues or from stakeholders could be one. The ability to build a realistic timeline for, projects that match both the need, the purpose and the need and the people who will be involved in carrying it out.
You know, it's so interesting. The listeners won't know this because you and I talked to each other prior. We were just getting coaching. Sangita just coached me on this prior to this episode around co-design and collaboration. And I think I was holding on this particular project a sense of urgency, and the messaging from today's episode is really resonating and vibrating on so many levels for me. And I hope this content was helpful for you all. And we're excited to hear what you think about it. And we would love to hear what you think are some competency a leader has to hold as they're doing this work to deconstruct and understand their relationship to sense of urgency over time. Until the next time, thanks, y'all. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
We hope this conversation provided helpful insight and inspired you to create a more inclusive and liberated workplace. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. Your support makes a huge difference in helping us reach more listeners like you. We love to hear your thoughts on today's topic. Connect with us on social media and drop a comment. You can find all the links in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.